He was 63 years old when he saw it, drifting quietly near the muddy banks of the Mississippi River, just outside the small town of Vicksburg. A fisherman known for waking before dawn and never fearing the thick rolling fog, he thought he had seen everything the river could throw at him. But that morning, there was a wooden box floating against the current, spinning slowly as if it was alive, and no one could understand how it got there. When he pulled it closer with his hook and felt how heavy it was, something inside him told him he needed to see what was inside, no matter the risk. When the authorities arrived and saw what lay hidden within, their faces turned pale under the harsh morning sun. Would you dare to open this box if you found it drifting toward you? Tell me below and subscribe for more real stories like this one. His name was Samuel Hargrove, but everyone in Vicksburg just called him Sam. 63 years old, face creased like the river mud, hands calloused from decades pulling catfish and logs from the swirling brown water. He lived alone in a creaking white cabin on stilts near the bend, where the morning mist would slide across his porch like a living thing. Every morning before dawn, Sam would push his old aluminum boat into the river, the motor coughing awake as he drifted out past the fog banks, fishing lines neatly coiled, coffee steaming in a metal cup, and his mind quiet. He wasn't a man to complain. The river was in his bones, and even on days when the fish were stubborn or the weather turned fast, Sam would nod to himself and say, "She's got her moods, let her be." But on that morning, the air felt heavier, the birds were silent, and the fog didn't lift as quickly as usual. The smell of wet silt was mixed with something else, something metallic, sharp, like the scent of old pennies crushed underfoot. As he made his way past a half-sunken log near the bend, Sam's eyes caught a shape drifting in the current, moving slowly against the flow, turning in place as if caught by an invisible hand. It was a wooden box, about the size of a small trunk, the wood dark and waterlogged, but somehow still afloat. The corners were reinforced with rusted iron, and a thick rope was tangled around one end, trailing off into the water like a snake that had given up the fight. Sam slowed the boat, letting the current ease him closer, his eyes narrowing as he studied the box, the reflection of the morning light catching on something dark smeared across the lid. He didn't know why, but his heart began to beat faster. Maybe it was the way the box moved, or the way the water seemed to resist it, as if the river itself didn't want to touch what was inside. Sam reached for the long iron hook he kept by the seat, its handle worn smooth from years of pulling nets and ropes, and extended it toward the drifting box. The hook caught on the rope, and Sam pulled it gently, the box gliding across the water until it tapped against the hull of his boat with a soft, hollow sound that made him shiver. He looked around, half expecting someone to be watching him from the banks, but the fog had returned, swallowing the trees and the distant rooftops, leaving only the quiet lap of the water against the boat. Sam bent down and pressed his hand against the top of the box. It was cold, colder than the river should have allowed, and as he gripped the rope to pull it fully into the boat, he felt the weight of it, dense and unbalanced, as if something inside shifted when he moved it. For a moment, he considered letting it go. Whatever was inside, it wasn't his business. The river carried all sorts of things, and sometimes it was better to let them pass. But as he looked at the box, the dark smear on the lid became clearer, and he realized it wasn't just mud. It looked like something else, something darker, something that had dried in long streaks across the wood. His breath caught, and the hair on the back of his neck stood up, a warning from somewhere deep inside him. Still, Sam was not the type to walk away. He pulled the box onto the floor of the boat, water dripping from the corners, pooling around his boots. He sat back down, his hands shaking slightly as he took a sip of his coffee, trying to steady himself. The box sat there, silent, as if it was waiting for him to decide what to do next. The sun began to break through the fog, thin rays of light catching on the water, turning the river into a shimmering path that led nowhere. Sam took a deep breath, wiping his hands on his jeans, and leaned forward to examine the box more closely. There was a small iron latch on the front, rusted but still intact, and it looked as if it had been tied shut with a piece of thin, frayed rope that had long since snapped. He reached out, running his finger along the edge of the lid, feeling the rough wood, the grooves where the water had worn into it. A strange smell rose from the box, something sour, earthy, and mixed with the scent of old wood and river water. It made his stomach tighten, but he couldn't pull himself away. He remembered his father once telling him that the river always gives back what it takes, but it doesn't always give it back in the way you expect. Sam felt those words echo inside him as he stared at the box, the boat rocking gently beneath him. The world felt smaller in that moment, the fog pressing in, the sounds of the river falling away until all he could hear was the soft creak of the boat and the quiet drip of water from the box. He thought about turning back, bringing it straight to the sheriff in town, letting someone else deal with it. But something inside him, something stubborn and old like the river itself, told him that he needed to see what was inside before anyone else did. Sam reached for the latch, testing it with his thumb. It was stiff, the rust flaking away under his touch, but it moved. He felt a strange coldness on his skin as he pressed it down, the lid shifting slightly as the tension released. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the edge, the smell growing stronger, mixing with the scent of the river and the faint aroma of his coffee, which now smelled bitter in his nose. In that brief pause, a memory came to him of when he was a boy, finding an old jar washed up on the banks after a flood, and the way it had shattered when he opened it, revealing nothing but mud and a dead snake curled inside. He had screamed then, dropping the jar, running back to his father, who had simply nodded and said, "The river keeps secrets, Sam. Best leave them be." But Sam was older now, and he had learned that sometimes the secrets of the river found their way to you, whether you wanted them or not. He took a deep breath, gripped the edge of the lid and lifted it, just enough to let the air escape with a soft hiss, like a sigh from something that had been waiting a long time to be found. Inside, in the dim light, he saw something wrapped in what looked like old oilcloth, dark and heavy, the fabric slick with moisture. The smell hit him fully now, sharp and thick, making him gag as he turned his head away, his eyes watering. He closed the lid quickly, pressing it down, his breath coming in sharp gasps as he tried to clear the taste from his mouth. The boat rocked beneath him, the river seeming to flow faster now, the fog swirling as if it was alive. Sam sat back, wiping his mouth, his hands trembling. Whatever was inside that box, it wasn't just debris or old junk washed down from upriver. It was something else, something that didn't belong there, and he could feel it, like a weight pressing on his chest. He knew he couldn't leave it out here. He had to bring it back, had to show someone, had to find out what was inside that oilcloth, even if every part of him screamed that it was a mistake. The river had given him this, and now it was his to deal with. As he turned the boat toward the shore, the fog began to clear, and the town of Vicksburg came into view, quiet and still in the early morning light. Sam's hands tightened on the tiller, his mind racing with questions he couldn't yet form. The image of that wrapped bundle in the box burned into his thoughts. He didn't notice the way the water seemed to ripple differently around the boat, the way small eddies formed and vanished, as if something beneath the surface was moving with him, following him back toward the shore. All he could think about was the box, and the promise he had made to himself in that moment. He pulled it from the river. He would find out what was inside, no matter what it cost him. Sam felt every inch of the river under his boat as he made his way back toward the dock, the box at his feet heavy and silent, as if it was waiting for him to make his next move. The fog was lifting, burned away by the rising Mississippi sun, but Sam felt a coldness in his chest that wouldn't leave, as if part of the river had taken root inside him the moment he touched that latch. His eyes kept flicking down to the box, the way water still dripped from the corners, darkening the wood in slow, spreading stains that looked too much like old blood. As he neared the dock, he could see the rusted pickup he had parked there before dawn, the gravel crunching under his boots as he stepped out of the boat and tied it off with practiced hands. He looked around, half hoping, half dreading that someone would be there to see him, to help him decide what to do next. But the riverbank was empty, the air still, the only sounds the creak of the dock and the distant call of a heron cutting through the morning. Sam bent down, gripping the sides of the box, and heaved it up into his arms. It was heavier now, or maybe he was just more aware of what it carried, the promise of something that had been hidden away, waiting for someone like him to find it. The rough wood dug into his forearms as he walked, the smell rising again, faint but impossible to ignore, making him swallow hard as he approached his truck. He placed the box gently in the bed of the truck, covering it with a tarp he kept for his nets. For a moment, he stood there, staring at the shape beneath the tarp, the way it shifted slightly as the truck settled on its suspension. Part of him wanted to drive straight to the sheriff's office, to let them deal with whatever it was. But the other part of him, the part that had pulled catfish from the mud and chased down logs in floodwaters, the part that had learned the river's moods and secrets, told him that he needed to see what was inside before anyone else. He climbed into the truck, turning the key, the old engine rattling to life as he pulled away from the dock, the river glinting in the rearview mirror like a snake slipping back into the grass. As he drove the back roads toward his cabin, Sam's mind was racing, replaying the moment he opened the box, the glimpse of that dark, wrapped bundle, the smell that seemed to sink into his skin. What if it was something illegal? Drugs, maybe, stashed by someone upriver, washed loose by a storm, or something worse, something that had once been alive, and now was only a memory wrapped in oilcloth. The thought made his hands tighten on the wheel, his knuckles pale against the cracked leather. He turned onto the dirt path that led to his cabin, the tires kicking up dust that settled slowly in the morning light. Parking beside the porch, Sam sat for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled, staring at the box in the bed of the truck. He didn't want to move it again, didn't want to bring that smell into his home, but he knew he couldn't leave it there, exposed, vulnerable to anyone who might pass by. With a grunt, he climbed out, pulling back the tarp, the sight of the box making his stomach twist again. He lifted it carefully, the weight pulling at his arms, and carried it up the steps of the porch, setting it down near the door. The cabin creaked softly as he opened the door, the familiar scent of coffee and old wood welcoming him, grounding him for a moment before he turned back to the box. Inside, the cabin was dim, the curtains drawn against the morning light, the soft tick of the old clock on the wall the only sound. Sam cleared a space on the kitchen table, moving aside his tackle box and a stack of old newspapers, before lifting the box and setting it down with a soft thud that echoed in the quiet room. He stood there, breathing heavily, staring at the box, the dark smears on the wood even more visible in the dim light. The rope still hung from one corner, frayed and dirty, a reminder of how he had found it, drifting alone in the fog. Sam reached out, his hand hovering over the latch, feeling the coldness radiating from the wood. His mind raced with questions, doubts that circled like vultures. What if it was evidence of something terrible, something that would pull him into trouble he didn't need at his age? What if it was dangerous, something that could hurt him just by being near it? But the other thought, the stronger one, was that he had to know. He had to see what was hidden, had to understand why the river had given this to him. Sam took a deep breath, pressing the latch down, the click loud in the silence. He lifted the lid slowly, the hinges creaking, the smell rising again, thicker, almost sweet now, like rotting fruit mixed with the iron tang of blood. He gagged, turning his head, but forced himself to look. The bundle was there, wrapped tightly in the oilcloth, dark and heavy, the fabric slick and darkened by moisture. Sam reached out, his fingers trembling, and touched the edge of the cloth, feeling the way it stuck slightly to the wood beneath it. He pulled, the cloth peeling away slowly, revealing what was inside, inch by inch. At first, he thought it was just mud, dark and clinging, but as more of the cloth fell away, he saw it wasn't mud at all. It was leather, old and cracked, wrapped tightly around something rectangular, the edges lined with tarnished brass. He pulled the cloth completely off, letting it fall to the floor with a wet slap, and stared at the object now sitting in the box. It was a case, about the size of a large book, the leather dark with age and water damage, the brass fittings green with corrosion. There was a small clasp on the front, still intact, though rusted, and as Sam reached out to touch it, he felt a strange warmth radiate from the leather, as if it had been waiting for him. He hesitated, his hand hovering over the clasp, the smell of the river and the rot thick in the air. His mind was screaming at him to stop, to call the sheriff, to let someone else deal with this. But his heart, the part of him that trusted the river, told him that this was his to see through. He clicked the clasp open, the sound sharp in the quiet, and lifted the cover. Inside, carefully arranged in a bed of dark, rotting velvet, was a collection of small metal objects, coins, tarnished and old, stamped with dates he couldn't read, their surfaces worn smooth by time and water. There were other objects too, small tools, what looked like a compass with a cracked glass face, and a knife with a bone handle, the blade dark with age. And in the center, wrapped in a piece of oiled paper that was nearly falling apart, was a small leather-bound book. Sam reached out, lifting it gently, the leather soft and crumbling under his fingers. He opened it, The pages damp and fragile, covered in writing so small and neat that it looked almost like a machine had done it. The ink had run in places, but he could still make out words, names, dates, and what looked like coordinates. Sam felt a chill run through him as he realized what he was holding. This was a journal, a record of something, kept by someone who had wanted to hide it, who had wrapped it carefully and sealed it away, trusting the river to take it far from prying eyes. But the river, in its own way, had given it back, and now it was his to understand. He turned the pages slowly, the paper tearing slightly at the edges, the smell of mold rising as he moved. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned, the ink faded but still legible in many places. There were notes about travel, about items bought and sold, mentions of places along the river, and names that meant nothing to Sam. But as he reached the middle of the book, he found something that made him stop. It was a map, hand-drawn, showing a section of the Mississippi with markings along the banks, X's in certain places, and notes written beside them. One of the X's was near Vicksburg, near the place where Sam had found the box. The note beside it was simple, but it made Sam's breath catch in his throat. Cash secured. Do not return. Sam stared at the words, his mind spinning. What had been hidden there? What had this person secured that they didn't want to return for? And why had the river brought it to him now, after all these years? He closed the book gently, setting it down on the table, and looked back into the box at the other objects, each one a piece of a story he didn't yet understand. The river had given him this mystery, and he felt a responsibility to see it through, to find out what had been hidden and why. Sam sat back in his chair, the weight of the discovery settling over him like the fog that still clung to the river outside. He knew he couldn't do this alone, that he would need to show someone, to get help in figuring out what this all meant. But for now, he let himself sit in the quiet, the box open before him, the morning sun streaming through the window, catching on the tarnished brass and the dark leather, turning them into something almost beautiful. Before he moved, before he made the call, he knew he had to make. He took one last look at the book, at the map and the words written there, and let the questions fill him. Who had hidden this? What were they trying to keep safe, or keep hidden? And why had the river chosen him to find it? And as he sat there, the thought came unbidden, a question that made him shiver. What if whatever was hidden had never truly been lost, but had been waiting for the right person to find it, and open the door to something far bigger than he could imagine? If you were in Sam's shoes, would you have opened that box, knowing the river doesn't give anything for free? Or would you have left it drifting, letting the current take it away before it could change your life forever? Let me know what you would have done in the comments. And don't forget to like this story if it kept you watching. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next in this mystery, and hit the notification bell to be the first to see the truth about what Sam found inside that box and why it should have never been opened. Sam didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the old cabin, every rustle of wind through the trees outside made him sit up, eyes darting to the kitchen table where the open box lay under the harsh glow of a single lamp. The small leather journal rested on top of the tarnished objects, its brittle pages still open to that map with the single note, "Cash secured, do not return." The words replayed in his mind like the endless hush of the river, over and over, until he could almost hear them whispering in the darkness. At dawn, Sam poured himself a cup of bitter coffee, the steam rising into the cold air, and he finally made the decision. He couldn't carry this alone. Whatever was hidden, whatever this map led to, it wasn't just some lost treasure story to be told in whispers over bait buckets at the dock. It was something deeper, older, and the way the river had offered it to him felt like a warning as much as it did a gift. He picked up the old rotary phone, the cord stretching as he dialed the sheriff's office, the click of each number sharp in the quiet. Sheriff Alan Mathers had been in Vicksburg longer than Sam, a quiet man who had seen enough of the river's secrets to know when something needed more than a passing glance. When the line connected, Sam kept his voice low, as if the walls themselves might overhear. "Alan, it's Sam. You better come by." The sheriff didn't ask questions. He knew Sam well enough to understand that if he was calling this early, it wasn't about a lost net or a stray dog. He simply said, "On my way," and hung up, leaving Sam to stand in the kitchen, watching the sun creep across the floorboards, inching closer to the box like a hesitant hand. When the knock finally came, it was sharp, 2 quick raps on the wooden door. Sam opened it to find Sheriff Mathers standing there in his worn uniform, a thermos in one hand, his other hand resting near the holster at his hip out of habit rather than fear. His eyes, sharp and pale blue, swept over Sam's tired face before shifting to the box on the table. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Alan said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, the familiar scent of coffee and river mud clinging to his clothes. "I might have," Sam replied, closing the door as the sheriff set his thermos down and walked over to the table, studying the open box with careful eyes. Alan reached out, lifting the leather-bound journal with the delicate touch of someone who understood the weight of old paper. He flipped through the damp, yellowing pages, his eyes scanning the small handwriting before settling on the map. He studied it for a long time, his thumb running along the edge of the page, tracing the lines and the small X near Vicksburg. "Where'd you find this, Sam?" Alan asked, his voice low, almost cautious. "River gave it to me," Sam replied, sitting down heavily in the old chair, the wood groaning under his weight. "Found it drifting in the fog, just before sunrise yesterday." Alan set the book down carefully, looking back at the box, at the small collection of tarnished coins, the compass with the cracked face, the old knife with the bone handle. He picked up the compass, turning it over in his hands, the needle inside rattling slightly but refusing to settle. "This isn't just junk," Alan said, setting the compass back down. "This looks old, Sam, really old." "I know," Sam replied, rubbing his temples. "But it's that map, Alan. The note, cash secured, do not return. What do you think it means?" Alan didn't answer immediately. Instead, he walked to the window, pulling back the curtain to look out at the river in the distance, the water glinting in the morning light. The sheriff had always trusted the river, but he knew better than most that it could carry secrets for decades before spitting them out again. "I think it means someone left something behind," Alan finally said, letting the curtain fall back into place. "And they didn't want to come back for it. Which means either it was dangerous, or it was valuable enough that they couldn't risk being seen." He turned back to Sam, his expression hardening. "We need to get someone else to look at this, Sam. This might be bigger than you or me." Sam nodded, a heavy feeling in his chest. "Who do you have in mind?" "I'll call in a friend from Baton Rouge," Alan replied. "Used to be with the Coast Guard, now works as a consultant for the state when they find things they can't explain. Name's Ray Torres. If there's something hidden out there, he's the one who'll find it." Sam didn't argue. He simply stood, moving to the counter to refill his coffee, the cabin silent except for the quiet drip of the pot. An hour later, a dark SUV rolled up the dirt path, dust billowing behind it as it came to a stop near the porch. A man stepped out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and eyes that scanned the surroundings like a hawk searching for prey. Ray Torres introduced himself with a firm handshake, his grip strong, his eyes sharp as he listened to Sam recount how he found the box, how the fog had seemed to thicken when he pulled it from the water, how the smell of the river had clung to it, and how the map inside pointed back to a place near Vicksburg that Sam knew well. Ray opened the box without hesitation, inspecting each item with the practiced eye of someone who had pulled bodies, wreckage, and evidence from riverbeds all across the South. He lifted the journal, studying the map, his finger tapping the X near Vicksburg. "This is old," Ray muttered. "Real old. But if it's what I think it is, there's more out there. This could be tied to river smuggling routes, maybe even older caches from the Prohibition era, or earlier." Sam felt the room tilt slightly, the weight of what Ray was saying sinking in. This wasn't just a random find. It could be part of something bigger, something that had been hidden for decades, waiting for the river to give it up. "Can you take me to where you found it?" Ray asked, looking at Sam with an intensity that made him nod without thinking. They left the cabin, the morning sun already high, cutting through the lingering mist as they loaded into Sam's old truck, the sheriff following behind in his cruiser. They drove in silence, the dirt road winding toward the dock where Sam's boat waited, tied off and gently rocking against the wooden posts. Ray stepped onto the dock, looking out over the river, the current slow and steady, the water reflecting the blue of the sky like a mirror. He turned to Sam, nodding. "Let's see where the river wants to take us," Ray said. They climbed into the boat, the engine coughing to life as Sam guided it back toward the bend where he had first seen the box. The water was calm, but beneath the surface, Sam felt the same uneasy pull, the way the current seemed to move differently here, swirling in quiet eddies that never fully settled. Ray leaned over the side, dropping a small sonar device into the water. the screen in his hand flickering as it began to map the riverbed. Lines and shadows appeared, shapes beneath the surface, logs, rocks, and something else. Something rectangular, half buried in the mud near the bank. "There," Ray said, pointing to the screen. "You see that? That's not a natural formation. It's too clean, too straight." Sam felt his throat tighten. "What do you think it is? Could be a crate? Maybe a chest?" Ray replied, pulling the sonar back up. "Or it could be something worse." They anchored the boat, Ray pulling on a pair of rubber gloves as he prepared a grappling hook, tying it to a thick rope before tossing it into the water. It sank quickly, the rope paying out as Ray guided it toward the shadow on the sonar. When it snagged, the rope went taut, and Ray braced himself, pulling slowly, carefully, the water rippling as something began to rise from the muddy depths. The shape broke the surface, dripping with river water and thick mud, the outline of a wooden crate becoming visible, reinforced with rusted iron bands, almost identical to the box Sam had found, but larger, heavier. It thudded against the side of the boat, the water darkening around it as silt and debris floated free. Ray and Sam exchanged a look, the sheriff watching silently from the other side of the boat, his hand near his radio, ready to call in backup if things turned dark. Sam felt his heart pounding in his chest, the same feeling he had when he first saw the box in the fog, the sense that the river was watching, waiting to see what they would do. Ray tied the crate off, securing it to the side of the boat, and looked at Sam, a thin smile on his lips. "You found something big, Sam. We need to see what's inside." Sam swallowed, nodding, the smell of the river and the mud thick in the air, the water around them swirling as if the current itself was curious. As Ray reached for the crowbar, Sam felt the moment hang in the air, the quiet before the truth was revealed, the river holding its breath, waiting. If you were there with your hand on that crowbar, staring at a crate the river kept hidden for decades, would you open it? Or would you leave it for the current to reclaim? Tell me below what you would do, and don't forget to like this story if you want to see what's inside. Subscribe so you don't miss the next part of this true river mystery, and hit the bell so you're the first to uncover what the Mississippi has kept hidden all these years. Ray Torres took a slow breath, his hand tightening on the crowbar, its metal cold in the humid Mississippi air, as the crate rocked gently against the side of Sam's boat. Sam could feel the river pressing against them, the current soft but persistent, as if it were trying to tug the crate back into its depths before they could uncover what it had hidden for so long. The sheriff stood silently, his eyes narrowed beneath the brim of his hat, his radio crackling softly at his hip, but ignored, the weight of the moment thick around them. Sam's hands rested on the edge of the crate, the rough water-swollen wood cold beneath his fingertips. He didn't realize he was holding his breath until Ray slipped the crowbar under the edge of the lid and pried it up with a sharp crack of splintering wood. The smell hit them first, stronger than before, a mix of river mud, rust, and something older, like the scent of a flooded cellar left to rot for decades. Sam turned his head, breathing through his mouth, but his eyes stayed fixed on the crate as the lid was lifted and set aside with a heavy thud onto the deck of the boat. Inside, the crate was lined with what appeared to be thick oilcloth, stained dark and clinging to the contents within. Ray reached in, pulling back the layers carefully, revealing what lay hidden inside. At first, it looked like bundles wrapped in more cloth, but as Ray pulled them free, the cloth fell away, revealing metal, cold and heavy, glinting dully in the light that filtered through the morning haze. There were rifles, old but remarkably well preserved, the dark wood of their stocks slick with moisture but intact. Their barrels were wrapped in layers of waxed cloth that had protected them from decades in the mud. Alongside them were pistols, revolvers with ornate engravings on their cylinders, and small wooden boxes that rattled softly as Ray lifted them, the sound unmistakable once he cracked one open. Bullets, still lined neatly in rows, the brass casings tarnished but whole. Sam's breath caught as Ray pulled one of the rifles fully free, turning it over in his hands. The markings were clear despite the years, the faint etching of a manufacturing stamp, 1943. Ray let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "These are World War II-era weapons," Ray said, his voice carrying a mix of awe and concern. "Black market weapons, maybe. Smuggled in or hidden away, probably to avoid federal eyes after the war." Sam felt the weight of the history pressing against him. His mind flashed to stories his father had told him about the river, how it had been used for all kinds of quiet trades, Booze during Prohibition, stolen goods, people running from debts they could never repay. But war weapons, hidden so close to home, waiting in the mud all these years. This was something different. The sheriff pulled his radio from his belt, speaking quickly but calmly, calling in the discovery. As he did, Ray continued to pull objects from the crate, laying them carefully on the deck of the boat. There were more boxes, heavier ones, and when Ray opened one, Sam saw the glint of coins, silver dollars stacked tightly, tarnished but unmistakable. Payment, Ray muttered, or a stash meant to finance something that never happened. But it was the small, leather-bound journal, nearly identical to the one Sam had found in the first box, that made Ray pause. He opened it carefully, the pages sticking together, the ink smudged but legible enough to read fragments. July 12, 1946. Crate secured at Bend, waiting for pickup, must not be seen. And another entry, dated weeks later. Pickup delayed, too many eyes. Leaving cash until contact made. Ray looked up at Sam, his eyes sharp. Whoever left this never came back. Maybe they couldn't. The sheriff nodded, lowering his radio. Or maybe they didn't want to. We're going to need to call this in. Get the ATF out here. Maybe even the feds. Sam didn't argue. The river had held on to this secret for almost 80 years. But now it was out in the open, lying in the sunlight on the deck of his boat. The rifles, coins, and old journals telling a story that was bigger than any of them. He felt a chill despite the heat of the sun, a sense that something had shifted in the current of his life, that nothing would be the same after today. Ray repacked the weapons and coins carefully, ensuring they would remain secure until the proper authorities arrived. But before they did, Sam picked up the second journal, flipping through its pages, scanning the cramped handwriting until he found a page with a rough map, nearly identical to the first, but with more markings. One mark in particular caught his eye, a small X upriver, accompanied by a single haunting note. Final delivery. Must not fail. Sam's throat tightened as he looked out at the river, the water calm but moving, always moving. How many crates were out there still, buried under mud and time, hidden away by hands long dead? What was the final delivery, and why had it been so important that it was marked separately? He looked at Ray, who was watching him carefully. You think there's more? Ray nodded slowly. Yeah, Sam. I think the river's got more secrets than we can imagine. The sheriff stepped closer, lowering his voice. If there's more out there, we're going to need to find it before someone else does, before it ends up in the wrong hands. Sam swallowed, the weight of the moment settling over him like the Mississippi fog. He wasn't a young man anymore, but the river had chosen him for this, and he couldn't walk away now. There was something else out there, waiting, something connected to these crates, these journals, and the men who had hidden them so long ago. As the sound of sirens approached from the distance, cutting through the quiet of the riverbank, Sam made a silent promise to himself. He would see this through, no matter where it led, because some debts, even those owed to the river, demanded to be paid in full. Later, as the ATF agents arrived, cataloging the weapons and coins, carefully lifting the crates from the boat to secure them for transport, Sam stood back, watching, the leather journal heavy in his hand. One of the agents, a young woman with sharp eyes, looked at him as they finished loading the evidence. "Sir, how did you find this?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Sam looked out at the river, the current glinting in the afternoon sun, and gave a small, tired smile. "I didn't," he said quietly. "The river gave it to me." The agent nodded slowly, as if she understood, though Sam knew she couldn't, not really. Only someone who had lived their life by the river, who had felt its moods and learned its whispers, could truly understand what it meant when the river decided to give something back. As they drove away, leaving the dock quiet again, Sam remained by the water's edge, the journal in his hand, the final X marked on the map burning into his mind. He knew what he needed to do next. That night, as the river reflected the silver light of the moon, Sam prepared his boat again, checking the motor, his ropes, his gear. The final delivery. It was out there, waiting, and if the river wanted him to find it, he would. But as he loaded the last of his gear onto the boat, a question gnawed at him, darker than the river's deepest channel. What if this final delivery was never meant to be found? What if some secrets are meant to stay buried, and by digging them up, you wake something that should have been left to the river forever? And you, sitting here with me, Would you follow the river's call to find what's hidden beneath its muddy depths, or would you leave it alone, letting the current keep its final secrets? Let me know in the comments below what you would do. Would you open that last crate if you found it, or would you leave it to the river? If this story kept you watching, don't forget to like this video to help others find these true hidden mysteries. Subscribe so you won't miss what Sam discovers next, and hit the notification bell to join us as we follow the river into its deepest secrets. Because the river is calling, and some mysteries are only just beginning. The moon hung low and swollen over the Mississippi, its pale light turning the water into a silver road that seemed to stretch endlessly into the dark. Sam stood on the dock, the cool night air pressing against his skin, the small leather journal heavy in his pocket, the words, "Final delivery, must not fail," echoing in his mind like a drumbeat he couldn't silence. He had told himself he would wait until morning, that he would let the authorities handle it, that it wasn't his burden to carry anymore. But the river didn't let go once it chose you, and Sam knew he would never find peace until he saw this through. He pushed his boat into the water, the soft splash of the hull slipping from the mud into the current, sounding like the closing of a door behind him. As the engine hummed, Sam navigated the familiar bends, the lantern at the bow casting a narrow path of light over the water, catching the glint of eyes along the banks where raccoons and deer watched him drift past, silent witnesses to a journey they couldn't understand. The map in the journal was clear, the X marked in the same careful hand that had marked the cache near Vicksburg, only this one was farther upriver, near an old bend where the water ran deep and the banks were overgrown with willow and cypress. The closer he got, the more the river seemed to change. The current slowed, the water thickened, and the air grew heavy with the scent of mud and something else, something older and metallic that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. The lantern flickered as the boat glided to a stop, the motor idling softly before Sam killed it, letting the boat drift until it bumped against something beneath the water with a soft, hollow thud. He peered over the edge, the lantern light rippling across the surface until it caught the outline of something just beneath, a shape too straight to be a log, too intentional to be river debris. Sam grabbed his hook, plunging it into the water, feeling it catch on something solid. With a deep breath, he pulled, the muscles in his arms straining as the object broke free from the mud with a slow, sucking release. The water churned as the crate surfaced, dark and slick, dripping mud and river water, the same rusted iron bands reinforcing its edges, the same heavy silence hanging around it like a shroud. Sam secured it to the boat, the crate knocking against the hull with dull, rhythmic thumps as the river rocked them gently. The air felt colder now, the moonlight sharp against the water, and Sam found himself glancing around, half expecting to see someone watching from the shadows along the bank. But there was only the river, patient and silent, waiting to see what he would do next. With trembling hands, Sam lifted the crate onto the deck, the weight of it settling heavily, the boards creaking beneath it. He stared at it for a long moment, the cold seeping into his skin, the lantern light dancing across the wet wood, turning it into a shifting mosaic of shadows. He reached for his crowbar, the metal cold and familiar in his grip, and slipped it under the edge of the lid. For a moment, he hesitated, the river whispering around him, the past pressing down on him with invisible hands. Then, with a sharp breath, he pried the lid open. The smell hit him like a wall, damp, metallic, sharp with the scent of old earth and rust. He turned his head, gagging, but forced himself to look. Inside, wrapped in rotting oilcloth and layers of waxed paper, were bundles upon bundles of paper, bound tightly with old twine that had nearly dissolved into the layers of decay. Money. Stacks of old bills, some so water-damaged they were little more than pulp, others still intact, the faded green of their ink clear in the lantern light. Sam reached in, lifting a bundle carefully, the paper sticking to his gloves as he turned it over, reading the dates. 1944, 1945, 1946. War years. Post-war years. Beneath the money were documents, sealed in waxed envelopes that had mostly held against the water, the names on them unfamiliar but the contents unmistakable. Lists, codes, manifests of shipments, ledgers filled with transactions in neat, careful handwriting. It was a record, a roadmap of a smuggling operation that had once used the Mississippi as its lifeline, hiding weapons and wealth in the mud while the world turned above, blind to the secrets that flowed beneath. Sam's mind reeled as he sifted through the papers, each page a glimpse into a forgotten war, a hidden crime, a promise made in the dark and kept by the river for decades. The money was old, but collectors would pay for it, and the information in those ledgers could still mean something to someone, descendants of those who had hidden it, or those who would want it buried forever. He sat back, the crate open before him, the river lapping softly against the hull, the moon high overhead, and he felt the weight of it all pressing into his chest. The final delivery. It had never been completed, the crate abandoned, the river left to guard it until someone was brave or foolish enough to pull it free. Sam looked out over the water, the dark current reflecting the stars, and he realized that some part of him had known from the moment he saw the first box drifting in the fog that this was where it would end. The river had chosen him, for reasons he would never fully understand, and now it was up to him to decide what to do with what he had found. He closed the crate carefully, securing the lid once more, tying it down in the boat. As he started the motor and turned the boat back toward home, the river opened before him, calm and quiet, as if satisfied that its secret was finally being carried back to the world. But even as the current guided him home, Sam couldn't shake the questions that burned in his mind. Who were the men who had hidden this treasure in the mud all those years ago? What promises had they made? What deals had they struck in the shadows of war? And what debts were still waiting to be paid, hidden in the pages of those ledgers, in the names and numbers that had survived the years beneath the water? And more importantly, now that the river had given up its secret, what would it ask in return? Because the river never gives without taking something back. And you, watching this with me now, if you found a crate filled with wartime secrets and forgotten money, would you take it to the authorities, or would you keep it hidden, letting the river's secret become your own? Let me know in the comments what you would do. Would you have opened the crate in the dead of night, alone with the river and your doubts? Or would you have let it sink back into the mud, leaving the past buried forever? If this story kept you watching until the end, smash that like button so others can join us in these true hidden river mysteries. Subscribe for more stories of real discoveries and unsolved secrets, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next as we continue to follow the river and its stories that refuse to stay buried, because the river is calling, and some mysteries are only just beginning.